There is something about America in the 1950s that makes people nostalgic for an era many never experienced. The affordable homes, the cheap gas, the sense that a single paycheck could support an entire family. If someone lived through it, they know exactly why those prices seemed almost magical compared to today. A dollar went further than most people now can imagine. The post-war economy was booming. Factories were running at full capacity, suburbs were spreading across the country, and an average worker could afford things that would seem impossible today. This was the decade that gave us affordable homeownership, cars for every family, and grocery bills that seemed fictional by modern standards. A teacher's salary could buy a house. A factory worker could support a spouse and 3 kids comfortably. The American dream was not just a concept, but a financial reality. Living in America in the 1950s meant participating in the most prosperous economy the world had ever seen. Let's walk through what things actually cost during that golden decade. Some of these numbers might seem unbelievable. Some of them explain why people remember the 1950s as a time when money worked differently. Let's step into that world. The most striking difference between the 1950s and today was housing costs. In 1950, the median home price in America was around $7,400. By 1959, it had risen to about $12,400, but even that seems impossible now. These were not tiny homes. These were proper houses with 3 bedrooms, 1.5 bathrooms, a garage, and a yard. The new suburbs spreading across America offered these homes to families with steady incomes. A house in Levittown, the famous planned community in Pennsylvania, cost $7,990 in 1950. That price included the lot. The houses were small by later standards, about 750 square feet, but they were new, modern, and affordable. The monthly mortgage payment on a typical home was around $60 to $80. This was manageable because the average household income in 1950 was about $3,300 per year. By 1959, it had risen to about $5,400. A family could realistically buy a home with a mortgage payment that took up perhaps 20 to 25% of their income. Today, that ratio seems like fantasy. Interest rates on mortgages were around 4 to 5% for most of the decade. Banks required 20% down payments, which meant saving was necessary, but with home prices so low, saving $1,500 for a down payment was achievable for families who were careful with money. Cars in the 1950s were affordable for average families. A brand new Chevrolet Bel Air in 1955 cost around $2,200. The iconic Ford Thunderbird launched in 1955 with a price of $2,944. These were beautiful cars, with chrome details and distinctive styling. A basic Ford sedan might cost $1,700. A Volkswagen Beetle, which was just arriving in America, cost around $1,500. Car payments were manageable. A family could finance a car for $60 to $80 per month. This meant most families could afford a car, and by the end of the decade, many families had 2 cars. Gas was extraordinarily cheap. In 1950, gas cost around 27 cents per gallon. By the end of the decade, it was still only about 30 cents per gallon. Filling a 20-gallon tank cost about $6. Americans could drive wherever they wanted without worrying much about fuel costs. This cheap gas enabled the car culture that defined American life. People could drive to new suburbs. Families could take road trips. Drive-in movies and drive-in restaurants became popular because driving was so affordable. Groceries in the 1950s cost a fraction of what they do today, and everyday food was surprisingly affordable. A gallon of milk cost about 80 cents. A loaf of bread was around 14 cents in 1950, rising to about 20 cents by the end of the decade. A dozen eggs cost 60 cents. A pound of ground beef was around 45 cents. Coffee cost 75 cents per pound. A pound of bacon was about 65 cents. Sugar cost 10 cents per pound. Butter was around 70 cents per pound. Fresh produce was inexpensive. Apples were perhaps 15 cents per pound. Potatoes might be 5 cents per pound. A whole chicken cost maybe $1. Families could eat well on a modest budget. A week's worth of groceries for a family of 4 might cost $15 to $20. This was perhaps 5 to 7% of a weekly paycheck for an average worker. Families could afford meat several times a week. Fresh vegetables were standard. Nobody worried about whether they could afford basic nutritious food. Shopping in the 1950s meant going to the local grocery store or the new supermarkets that were appearing. Chain stores like A&P, Safeway, and Kroger were expanding. These stores offered lower prices than small neighborhood shops. Supermarkets were a revolution in shopping, allowing people to browse and select their own items rather than asking a clerk to gather them. Processed and convenience foods were becoming popular. Frozen TV dinners appeared in the early 1950s, costing about 98 cents. These products represented modern convenience. Cake mixes, canned soups, and frozen vegetables made cooking faster. Women who were managing households appreciated products that saved time. Before we continue with entertainment and everyday expenses that defined life in this prosperous decade, if you are enjoying this look back at what America was really like and want to explore more decades and prices, consider subscribing. There are so many more stories about how Americans lived and how the economy has changed. Entertainment was remarkably affordable in the 1950s. A movie ticket cost around 50 cents. Families could go to the movies without it being a major expense. Drive-in movies were even cheaper, charging per car rather than per person. A family of 5 could see a double feature for maybe $1. Television was changing entertainment. A new television set cost around $200 to $300, which was expensive, but not impossible for a working family. By the end of the decade, about 90% of American homes had a television. The programming was free, supported by commercials. Families could watch variety shows, sitcoms, westerns, and news without any subscription fees. A portable radio cost around $30 to $40. These transistor radios became popular gifts. Teenagers could listen to rock and roll on their own radios. Records cost around $4 for an album. Singles were about 75 cents. Music was accessible. Teenagers could buy the latest Elvis or Buddy Holly record with their allowance. Eating out was affordable enough to be a regular treat. A hamburger at a diner cost around 25 cents. A soda was 5 cents. A milkshake might be 20 cents. A full meal at a family restaurant could be had from $1 to $2. McDonald's, which was expanding during the 1950s, advertised hamburgers for 15 cents. Families could afford to eat out occasionally without it straining the budget. A fancy restaurant dinner might cost $5 per person. This was expensive, but for celebrations or special occasions, middle-class families could manage it. Clothing was reasonably priced. A man's suit might cost $30 to $50. A woman's dress could be purchased for $10 to $20. Children's clothing was even cheaper. Shoes cost around $5 to $10 for adults. Department stores like Sears, JCPenney, and Montgomery Ward offered quality clothing at affordable prices. The Sears catalog was a fixture in American homes, offering everything from clothing to furniture at prices that working families could manage. People dressed more formally than they would later, but the clothing was affordable. Wages in the 1950s made these prices achievable. The minimum wage in 1950 was 75 cents per hour. By 1959, it had risen to $1 per hour. A factory worker might make $1.50 to $2 per hour. A teacher earned around $3,000 to $4,000 per year. A doctor might make $12,000 to $15,000 annually. These wages, combined with low costs, meant financial security was accessible. A single income could support a family. The wife could stay home with children, which was the cultural expectation. The family could still afford a house, a car, groceries, and occasional entertainment. What made the 1950s remarkable was not just the low prices, but the relationship between prices and wages. Housing took up a smaller percentage of income. Food was cheaper relative to earnings. Transportation was affordable. Healthcare costs, while not negligible, were far lower than they would become. A hospital stay might cost $20 to $30 per day. Doctor visits were perhaps $5 to $10 per visit. These costs were manageable without insurance for many families, though employer-provided health insurance was becoming common. The 1950s were not perfect. Not everyone shared equally in the prosperity. Racial discrimination meant black families often paid more for housing and earned less. Women earned significantly less than men for the same work. Poverty existed, though it was less visible in the growing suburbs. But for the expanding middle class, the 1950s were a time when money felt like it worked. A modest income bought a comfortable life. Savings were possible. The future looked secure. People could plan for stability because the math made sense. For those who remember buying their first home for $8,000 or filling their gas tank for $5, these were not just cheaper times but a different economic reality. The prosperity of the 1950s set expectations for what American life should be, expectations that would become harder to meet in the decades that followed. For those with memories of this remarkable era of American prosperity, there is always more history to explore.